Joan, I'm so excited to be here today to get to talk with you about your role as a really impactful leader in the field of nutrition education. I know you've been involved in the Society for Nutrition Education almost since its beginning.
And almost since my beginning as a nutritionist. I mean, we practically started at the same time.
That's right. It just was a coincidence that you started at the same time, and were very active in the society, particularly in the early days. Were president from, I think, around 1980.
I think that's right.
You were president, and you became chair of the program in nutrition at Teachers College right before you graduated with your doctoral degree, and were chair for a number of years and then active in the program. Tell us about what influenced your career choice. Why did you decide to become a nutrition educator?
Well, I think what was probably the most surprising and disappointing to me when I actually went to school and went to classes was that none of the things I was concerned about were they teaching about. I was very concerned about the environment, and there was nothing at all about whether there wasn't even enough about whether we were going to run out of food, whether there was going to be hunger in the world. That was not being taught. I remember going into my first class in nutrition education and having the teacher start out by talking about where nutrition education went on. And she said, well, in hospitals, in clinics, in doctors' offices, and I was sitting there listening to her thinking, that's not actually happening, right? I said, and I'm waiting for her to say television advertising because I've been with my children seeing what's going on television. And she never mentions it. Wow. And I finally raised my hand and, of course, showed myself immediately to be the radical in the class. But I recognized that mostly nutrition education was not going on in those places. It was going on out in the environment. Nobody was teaching about the food supply, which was the other reason I'd gone in. I was so appalled by what was in the food supply, what was in the supermarket, and I thought that I would learn about the problems with those foods. Well, that's not what was taught. Right. I was taught about vitamins and minerals, and I was, as I joked afterwards, everything after the swallow is what nutrition is about. It's not about what happens before the swallow.
You joined SNE before it was SNEB very early on in your time.
I think like the second or third year it was in, I don't know, but I think I went to the second annual meeting. And I was trying to think about how I heard about it. I'm sure that Aurea Pai, who chaired our department, I'm sure that she probably mentioned it. And my best friend Ruth Eshelman and I went together to that meeting. And I remember it was in Des Moines. I mean, it was a very small organization. So, it was like, and I found it was very companionable. It was like a great place to go and, meet all your friends and, whatever.
Talk a little bit about how you came to realize why local food is important, which is, I think, different than a lot of people think.
Oh, yeah. That was very funny, yes. Well, I realized how much trouble agriculture was in. Still is, alas. If we were going to solve anything, we had to get a lot of people on our side, and we had to get people to understand what the problems in agriculture were. And how could they do that if there were no farms around? So I decided that meant we had to keep local farms in business so people could know a farmer and understand what the problems were with farming. And the only way they could know a farmer is if there was a local farmer, and if there was a local farmer, then we had to buy what he ate, what he grew. I started growing my garden. The first thing people would say to me when I talked about eating locally, well, what do we do? What are we going to do in the Northeast? What are you going to eat? But I had no idea when anything was in season. I would try to buy butternut squash in June or something when it was like way past its season. There were no farmers markets to speak of, and there were very few signs on anything. Why would you want to know? Why would you care where anything came from, right? I mean, there was no feeling that was the important thing to know. So I decided I had to grow my own had to try to grow my diet and see what I could eat. And of course I found out it was really easy. I mean, it just requires that you not have this head that has been imposed on us all, which has 125,000 items in it in the supermarket, and I have to be able to choose from 125,000 items or I'm not eating, right? I have a very narrow diet in the winter. People think I'm living on lettuce. I mean, you can't live on lettuce. I don't even like salad very much. But I buy broccoli once in a while, but I mostly live on carrots and sweet potatoes and things like that are winter vegetables, potatoes, for my vegetables in the winter. That's what I do. And it's a perfect, I mean, I'm 94, so it must be healthy.
Well, didn't you, and you worked with Jennifer Wilkins and realized that nutritionally, all of those root vegetables give you everything that you need from vegetables.
Absolutely. That you can totally live on local food. Because for one thing, there is storage. There's all these storage vegetables. And also, let's face it, you can freeze things in the summer and have them in the winter. So you can have frozen things all the time. I have frozen soybeans all the time. I grow soybeans in the summer. So that's how I got to local food.
When you were very active in the Society for Nutrition, Education, and Behavior, and when you were the president particularly, you faced a lot of opposition, and you actually took that on in your presidential address. Talk about the opposition that you faced and why you thought it was important to take it on.
My presidential address, which was published, was my biggest effort to try to explain that if you left a society when people didn't agree with you, then they would leave then other people would leave when you disagreed with them. I mean, whoever was in charge, everyone else would leave. And there was no way that wasn't going to solve anything, that we had to stay together and talk. I wanted us to be able to continue to hear each other, where we should go now, what we should be pushing now. And I said, I think more than anything, we should try as hard as we can to try to say, nutrition isn't about nutrients. Nutrition is not about learning about vitamins A and B and C and D and whatever. Nutrition is about foods. Diets high in vitamin C and A are such and such and such and such. And I would change it to say diets high in foods rich in vitamins A and C, because that's what it was about. And it was always about that. This ultra-processed diet thing that's now come out, where we now know that people who eat ultra-processed diets eat more, eat faster, gain more weight, et cetera, et cetera. We know all this. And all we're trying to do in this country is figure out what it is in those ultra-processed diets that's doing it, as if somehow there's just no way that we can deal with the whole thing as a group.
So Joan, what do you think are some of the biggest obstacles that our field faces today?
Making money from selling just fruits and vegetables is not, you can't do it. You can't brand them. You can't distinguish between them from one place or another. So, I mean, the only way you can is if you're in a farmer's market and you say this, I grew it and it came from nearby, and you pay a little extra because you want the farmer there. There's reasons you might, but you can't nationally, you can't make a living selling fruits and vegetables in that way. We should not allow anybody to put out a new food product unless they could show there was a nutritional need for it. I would say that if somebody thinks they're interested in food, the first thing I'd urge them to do is go farm. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's going to put you in touch with real food. It's going to put you in touch with some wonderful people. And it's a very rewarding lifestyle. It's demanding. It's not very economically rewarding, but there's no question about it that it puts you the closest to food. Or find a way to help run farmers markets. There's in which you can do education on the grounds and so forth.
What would you say to people that are just beginning a career in nutrition, dietetics, nutrition education?
I at least think if you're going to go into this field, you should go in with open eyes, that the field is very constrained by one huge power. And I suppose the other thing would be to be as knowledgeable as you can about what actually is an ultra-processed food, and just go on the warpath against ultra-processed foods. Just make it a thing of yours that whenever you counsel anybody, you're going to say, well, this is lousy, this is lousy, this is lousy, this is okay, and explain why, and to just be an advocate.
Saying there's no good foods and bad foods is good for food industry.
Yes, exactly.
Saying that there's bad foods doesn't mean that people that sometimes eat those foods or eat them are bad. And so being able to take a systems approach in counseling, it's helping people to understand the challenges of eating well in our current food environment, that it really, really is challenging. And that's why we have to have people who figure out how to navigate this very challenging environment or to advocate to make it better.
Yeah, or both.
Or both, right. If we were thinking about what would be the goals for society, it would be the public health goal. The economic roots are so strong.
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, why wouldn't the public's health, the health of the population generally, be one of the major goals of a society?
Right.
It's obvious that it should be, right?
You've taught the nutrition ecology class for over 50 years now in the program, which has been described as transformative by generations of our students. Certainly when I talk to graduates, and even when I talk to graduates that took it before I was teaching it with you, one of the first things they will always say is, nutritional ecology is the course that I think about all the time.
That's nice to know.
Yeah.
It's a privilege, actually. I've always thought of it as a privilege to be able to teach something that is so transformative for people, because I know it is. I know it changes who they are and how they think.
Teaching something that doesn't have a lot of answers, that we can't, at the end of each session, quote unquote, wrap it up in a bow and say, okay, here's the 3 points that you're going away with.
Have a quiz.
Or have a quiz.
I never gave any. It's interesting. One year, I decided I had to start giving. It was terrible. It was a disaster. You know, it made them change the way they looked at the course.
Right.
How they read, everything. I
Right.
realized I didn't want, what was I going to quiz them about? Whether they remembered details? That wasn't the point.
Right. No, the point is putting together pieces of a puzzle and learning how to think and learning to think about larger systems and stepping back to ask the bigger questions, you know, and being curious. I think being curious to want to learn is a big part of it. Well, thank you for allowing us to come into your home to do this, and I think it will be really helpful for nutrition educators for the future to understand our history, where we came from, and using that to think about where we're going.
Well, good. I hope so. I hope so.